Thanks for everybody for joining us at Facing Race. I hope you're having a great time at our virtual presentation and having a blast here and wishing we could be there with you. My name is Joelle Stewart, and I'm the Policy Research Manager here at Race Forward. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Lanice Martin, who's the co-founder of the Hood Incubator in Oakland, California, who assembled this extraordinary panel. With us today is Kiana Hughes, who's the Deputy Director at Chicago NORML, and Malachi Sekou Amin, who is the CEO and founder of the California Urban Partnership based in Sacramento, California. Before we get into everything, I just want to contextualize what we're here to talk about. Throughout the 1980s, a series of federal, state, and local policy decisions created what's now known as the war on drugs, in which Black and Brown urban communities were disproportionately targeted by policymakers and police alike for drug possession and distribution. This led to a legacy of structural disinvestment that was catalyzed by surveillance and arrest rates throughout the 80s, 90s, and that even persists today. So it led to a number of different connected problems. And of course, cannabis is now legal for adult use in 11 states, and it's approved for medical use in 33, with another 4 deciding on the ballot this November. So the changing legal landscape has led to conditions that create wealth within the industry, presenting a once-in-a-generation opportunity to create generational wealth, not unlike the Silicon Valley tech boom that happened in the 90s and that continues today. In today's session, we'll be talking about our collective accountability to communities who experienced that devastation as a result of the war on drugs. Now that that very substance many people suffer repercussions from has become an entire multi-billion-dollar industry. Public discourse around equity programs that started after legalization happened, most prominently in California, but other states have started equity use, such as Illinois, and equity programs in other states exist as well, and in Massachusetts. But a lot of that public discourse around equity focuses on the need to diversify business ownership and focuses on dispensaries and things like that. But this section is going to touch on the intersections between racial justice and the cannabis industry that are commonly overlooked. How do we go from beyond business to ultimately restore justice on a community level? I'm so pleased to have today's panelists, and I look forward to hearing from everybody about about your experiences navigating through at the grassroots level and interacting with the government and the industry too. So to start off, why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from, and what is your relationship to the cannabis industry? And Lanice, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I'm currently based in Oakland, the Bay Area, and born and raised in New York. And my connection to the cannabis industry is really a lot of advocacy, racial justice, economic justice, I guess, diversity, equity, inclusion in the industry itself. But really, I'm a community organizer, and as an organizer, I saw an opportunity to organize a voter block of people, the cannabis community, people that were generally like hiding, not really out and about. A lot of folks that identify as the stoner community, they weren't really out there. But then they started building power and exercising it by getting adult use and medical. They started, first, a lot of folks, this is their single issue, and this is how they got their introduction to politics and policy making. And so I see an opportunity to invite those folks to and you can understand that it's your right to have the ability to buy weed and smoke it, then you could also, and then not only understand it, but fight for it and win it, then you could understand, fight for, and win ability to buy weed, ability to smoke weed, and ability to make sure that the communities harmed by its enforcement are restored. And that's what we have the opportunity to do, is to build the bridge with this voter block, so that as they continue to exercise their power, there's like 5 states right now that have cannabis on the ballot. Next time they put it on the ballot, it can include restoring communities that were harmed, not just the ability to buy and smoke.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lenise. And Kiana, love to hear from you.
Sure. So my name is Kiana Hughes. I am the Deputy Director of Chicago NORML. Many people are familiar with NORML as a national organization. It actually stands for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And specifically, we started Chicago NORML because there was a group of us, Black and brown, kind of budding cannabis industry, wannabes. And at that time, there really was no industry, but we would go to these events and we would see that there really weren't a lot of people that looked like us at these events. So we kind of joined forces with the national chapter. We do have a state chapter, but we really wanted ours to specifically be focused on, empowering people of color, communities of color, and really destigmatizing the plant. We were very active in the writing of the social equity laws and provisions that are included in our current adult use cannabis law, and we're still in the fight. We're nowhere near done. We're really barely getting started, but just seeing a lot of times like just how this whole thing is playing out, even in terms of licensing and places and situations where the intent is to create more equity and the intent is to get more Black and brown people involved in the industry. I'm really just noticing how, there's a lot of tweaks to be done, right? There's a lot of things that weren't anticipated previously that we're now like, okay, well, let's see if we can figure these things out. So that, and in addition to running Elevated Education, which is just a cannabis curriculum development organization, those are the things that keep me busy.
That's great. And Malachi?
Greetings. I am Malachi Sekou Amen, Executive Director of the California Urban Partnership. We have a mission to build economic security in communities of color, primarily the Black community, and we do that by research, education, and organizing community action. We've been around for about 10 years, and this year is our 10th year of operation. How did we get involved in the cannabis policy area? Really, it happened because in the background of our work, we really take market-driven approaches to addressing the racial wealth gap. As so many of us know, it will take 228 years from now for the average Black family's wealth to catch up with the average white family's wealth. And so we had been doing community design sessions for a couple of years, focused on how we could solve social problems, with economic approaches. And we ended up, after those design sessions, landing on 3 priorities around food, construction industry, and the technology sector. But then in 2016, California voters passed Prop 64, and our board members, had this conversation. We were like, wait a minute. So we're focused on food, construction, and tech because we're trying to close the racial wealth gap. But guess why we have a racial wealth gap? It's because of the war on drugs, and there's a heavy relationship between the war on weed and that racial wealth gap. So starting at the local level, some colleagues and myself started to have conversations, and really for a long time, the whole criminalization of weed and racialized enforcement of weed policies disturbed my soul. And I think that's really what drove the work that we started to do at the California Urban Partnership, because it put us in a place to be able to to do something about what disturbed us, specifically looking at four different aspects and edges of policy, like business and economic development, the tax revenue, what happens to that, the public health aspects of it, and certainly the criminal justice system reform issues. And long story shorter, it took us a while and a long fight to finally be able to adopt successfully, push for a successful adoption of the Cannabis Opportunity Reinvestment and Equity Program in Sacramento, which we've talked to many cities and counties about at their request around the state and around the nation. And so here we are, and I would echo Kiana that there is so much more work to do from this point on.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, so there is so much more work to do and to get into. And I know that it's been a journey. I know that in Chicago, Illinois just legalized at the beginning of this year. And Malachi, you mentioned Prop 64, which expanded the previous only medical only in California. So it's like the industry sort of began anew. It was a sort of a new area. So I'm wondering, I would love to hear about the Cannabis Journey. That's kind of like what we called it. Like, how did, and Lenise, I'm going to go to you first, because I know that with the work that you've done, you've seen sort of what happened before legalization and then have been in the trenches fighting for provisions to get into Prop 64, both state and local. And so I would love to hear more about how that really, that journey came to be in Oakland and in California that you've been involved.
All right, thank you. That's a big question. I'll try and keep it under 5 minutes. But we have a lot of time together, so I will go a little deep on some of the background and contextual. So I've had the pleasure of being around for every city that has, or every state that has made an equity program, because I'm from the city that has created the first equity program in the country and participated in the advocacy of that. And I continue to participate in the advocacy of that as the current chair of the Cannabis Commission. And since then, I've saw other cities, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Illinois, New York, multiple years. One year we really thought New York was going to happen. We were going out to New York like every quarter. Just really, engaging with the assembly members and just being up in Albany like that. The year before, we thought Chicago was going to be going big. We were spending a lot of time in Springfield. That's their capital, Albany, New York capital. I know school was hard, y'all. Gotta get these tests right. So, and then Sacramento, where Malachi is at the state capital for us here in California. And so just really all over, and you go to these conferences. This is my conference jacket, strategic. You see me when I'm walking around the halls. So you remember like, Lenise, if we have to connect. It was very useful back in the day when we got to be near each other. But you go to these conferences, and I'm not going to blame the conferences or the media or the politicians, but there was just so much emotion that was happening that there wasn't really a logical argument being made about the relationship to the cannabis industry and its an accountability to dismantling the impacts of the drug war. When drug war enforcement was happening, there was no cannabis industry, but there was a government. And there was a government that was spending our tax dollars and prioritizing those tax dollars to go to the staff of things like police, prosecutors, DAs, judges, correctional officers, probational officers. There was a supply chain in the criminal justice system. There is a supply chain to mass incarceration, and it has a cost. And so if racism works so that I'm looking at a map and in this area, I'm like, oh, this is a high crime area, then logically, I'm going to need a lot of police. I'm going to need a lot of police cars. I'm then going to need the lawyers to prosecute them. Well, you know, we're America, we're good, we got democracy. So then I'm going to need the lawyers to defend them. And then we're going to have the judge, you know, the jury. It starts getting real expensive, right? And you have to remember that a yes to something is a no to something else. And so if they were saying a yes to making sure that we have enough resources to police this high crime area, then they were saying no to ensuring that they have affordable housing, that we have quality school, that we have clear pathways into decent jobs and or four-year colleges and universities, healthcare, clinics, access to bank loans. We've seen it. A yes to all that other stuff was a no to what we know we need to thrive. In other communities where they had all those things I'm speaking of, they didn't have a heavy police presence. And they didn't have a heavy police presence because they weren't doing accounting for it. And so the cannabis industry started to become a term because the cannabis community started to build its power, come out of the shadows, demand access to the plant. Then later as an afterthought, now mind you, NORML's been around for many years, many years. This is not an attack on Chicago NORML. Kiana just explained to you why she created her Chicago NORML. This is not an attack on NORML in general, but it's an attack on where you're at in the fight. And this fight started first with a civil rights fight for the plant. It was never a human rights fight for Black people. That has been something that Oakland started. And now you have a conversation where folks are looking at the CEO of a big, and mind you, there's no big cannabis company yet, but you know, whatever is big now. So someone's, you know, looking at a big CEO of a big cannabis company, and they're asking that CEO, let's call him Todd, why is your company not diverse? And he's like, oh, well, pipeline, it's hard access. You know, we're trying, we got binders, whatever they come up with. But then that's the part we understand, because they asked that to Mark Zuckerberg. They asked that to the CEO of a hospital, finance, Wall Street. They asked those CEOs that question. So that's the part that I'm still like, okay, it's normal. When I start scratching my head, when you get out of the emotional craziness of it all, the next thing they asked the CEO, Todd, is about how he's working to dismantle the drug war. Now, I am not a white caper, but I don't know if that Todd was even there. I don't even know if that Todd belongs to the same class of white people that would sign up for a public service job to be a cop. Like a cop is like, that's a job when you know, that's not an old money job. Being an entrepreneur, startup, that's you got faith that you got some money coming from there and you're gonna bankroll this. People that become cops aren't old money. Now some of them are. There are intersectionalities here, but what I'm trying to say is we, for like 2 years, start yelling at the wrong white people. Not that we need to have been yelling at white people anyway. It's one thing to hold people accountable. It's one thing for our arguments to get messed up. And so while we started yelling at these new people that just started like we did, I started like Black people start talking about how they start making their products and help their grandma and the glaucoma, or I was just doing this and I was able to pay for my kids extra school this and extra school that. White people don't do the same thing. But when both of us all tried to transfer over and only one race started making it, then it started looking like, well, what's happening? But what we have to actually understand is it wasn't even the same white people. Because mind you, I started coming out around 2015, 2016. We got adult use regulation in 2018. The classes switched. It went from non-suits to suits, but because they all had the same white skin, and so what I'm trying to say here is that what's actually happening through the government's creation and design is an attack on small business. All small businesses are being attacked. And especially in California and all these places that had thriving undergrounds, they were all small businesses. And the way these regulations are being written is to attack all small businesses, all the races, all the sexes. And the majority of everyone is that is being thrown out are not the big guys that are coming in with more money. Now have of course, white man privilege. Is there a little bit of a higher percentage of existing legacy operators that were able to make it? Well, of course, but look at the full data set, and the majority of our small businesses haven't made it. And so the journey to me was getting out of my feelings. It might be true that my cousin just got out of jail like 9 weeks ago for it, but that is true. And it also might be true that Todd's a white man and he has a weed company, and my cousin, they're both true. But what is also true is that Todd did not have that raid truck in our neighborhood. He wasn't run up in our neighborhoods. He wasn't patting people around for the blunts or for the baggies or any of that stuff. And what there is an opportunity to understand is that sometimes in the pain of understanding how our families have been dismantled so much, when we're looking at the other people, race in this situation, it's like we only want sameness. Like we want, if our struggle is the same, but we're not going to have a sameness struggle. We're going to have connectedness. And so when I hear a white guy who is, I remember the first time I heard him speak, like I got sick to my stomach because I was like, that's privilege on fleek. He over here talking about the first word he heard learned as a kid was helicopter, not because he was rich, but because of the raids they would do on his family farms while they're in the Emerald Triangle as, outlaws, guerrillas. And I'm thinking, y'all niggas out here fucking growing weed. You literally grow weed, got a whole ass operation. What the fuck? Like, this ain't the same. This ain't the same. And then they let you live, took your stuff. If they're feeling a little feisty, maybe they shot your dog. But at the same time, you living here telling me the story, whereas they did crazier shit to people with a blunt, maybe no weed, sometimes it's the paraphernalia. And so I remember even I went through that like this, like I remember like I just didn't like that guy. I decided he was someone I didn't like. And then later I heard him again, and it's like realizing like, okay, well, white people that are all F the police in the cannabis industry and talk about raids and have to talk about like training their kids, like literally training their like 5-year-olds to learn their raid speech. My name is so-and-so. My aunt is my guardian. This is their fault. Like, that's real. So I felt like, oh, do I want to be the person who can't understand this? Do I need sameness, or can I settle for connectedness? And if I settle for connectedness, then that brings me to a place of finding an ally, a co-conspirator, and us both breaking down and dismantling the drug war. And that's kind of been the journey for me, is just coming in, first off, just being like, first thinking that I had to focus on the cannabis industry, and then realizing that the focusing on the cannabis industry wasn't going to lead to dismantling the drug war. But then more importantly, I also realized that if 90% of arrests for the drug war were for simple possession, then the other side of that math meant that only 10% of arrests in the drug war were for alleged commercial activity. And so if we focus all our work on creating equity programs about diversifying the industry, and we had platinum programs, I mean, no white man, nowhere, no ownership, no jobs, everybody from the hood up, everyone getting bread, whatever, that is a failed program. It's failed because it's only touching 10% of the population that was harmed by its enforcement. And so the journey for me was getting out of my feelings, going back to the reason why we named the Hood Incubator the Hood Incubator. We're a social scientist. We use community organizing, being in the streets as our lab. We listen. We make hypotheses. We assess. We pivot. And And without that framework, that methodology, the Hood Incubator, we're social scientists, we may have always just been stuck on the helping the 10% and think that somehow focusing on the industry would lead to dismantling the impacts of drug war enforcement. And that is not a linear argument. And the folks who have been pushing that argument are the folks to benefit from us being confused the most, the government. Because at the end of the day, the Hood Incubator now believes, and I think everyone that also will read the same thing that we read, will also come to the same understanding that the cost of the drug war need to be refunded to the communities harmed by its enforcement. And we welcome the same voter bloc that is getting medical access, adult use access, consumption loan access. We invite that same voter bloc to be allies in ending the drug war and reversing its impact.
Great, thank you, Lanice. Yeah, it is quite a journey, and I know that asking such a big question can lead to a big answer. So yeah, and Kiana, in terms of the cannabis journey that I'm thinking about, I'm wondering about specifically the jurisdiction that your organization is in Illinois, in Chicago, since this just happened, since full legalization just happened in Illinois just at the beginning of this year. I know you guys have been working on policy since way before that. And so I'm wondering how, you saw how you were able to iterate on the journey that Lanice and Malachi and other activists in California built, and how you were able to sort of make your, talk to Illinois and make them more responsive and think about where California may have, things may have slipped through the cracks with Prop 64, where you were able to build on that and any lessons that you learned.
Absolutely. I think, so one of the things that really separates Illinois from where social equity has happened across the nation is that we worked to make sure that social equity was actually codified in our legislation. So when it was brought to us, Chicago NORML, as an organization, hey, we want to work on this legalization bill. Their idea and what they thought social equity was and what their initial kind of pitches were was very limited, and it was very small in scope, and it just didn't hit the mark. So as we kind of did a lot of complaining and a lot of, no, this isn't it. They said, well, what do we do? What do you guys want us to do? Why is this? We would say, this is bullshit. And they'd be like, but why is it bullshit? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the cuss.
That's okay. Gotta keep it real.
Yeah, so it's interesting because then we were just like, okay, well, let's do some research. And we just researched all across the country where different cities had implemented things and other, it really hadn't been like a statewide thing for a lot of places. So we were really just, trying to figure out, okay, what can we do? Or it was statewide, but it wasn't a part of the actual law. It was a program or something that was kind of added in afterwards. So we looked at everybody's stuff. We pulled together a document that was like, yo, what if we did this? What if we had this? What if we had that? I stayed in Oakland for about 4 months in, I want to say 2018 now. Seems like so long ago. I went to Oaksterdam University. I got a scholarship to go there for the 16-week business program. And while I was there, I did hook up with the Hood Incubator and I volunteered for them. They were doing a phone bank. And the phone bank was really literally about just calling people in these particular zip codes that qualify as disproportionately impacted areas, or the people that live in those areas that would qualify for the social equity program. And it was literally just to call them and tell them about it. And just really, like, even something that's just that simple, that was a key thing, right? So when I got back to Illinois, and it was like, okay, one thing I learned is we got to make sure that people know about it, because I would literally be in Oakland, like at a bar, outside smoking a cigarette, talking to people like, yo, did y'all know? Y'all have, you guys have this. And, I'm from Chicago and we don't have that. We don't have anything like that. And y'all got this and you can get this. And, and they literally didn't know. And these were, in my eyes, and certainly at that time in my eyes, these were the exact people, who should know. Like, how come I know more about this? And I learned about it before I even came to California. But this is your neighborhood. This is part of your birthright, what you get, and you don't even know about it. So that was a big, big thing for me, was making sure that, especially the way our medical program had gone previously back in 2013, 2014, where nobody knew about it, and nobody knew about it. Nobody was able to compete for it. The rich white guys came in and they, sucked up all the money. There was a minority or Black-owned team that did get a license at that point, but there wasn't a lot of information. There wasn't a lot of education around it. And they did end up getting bought out by, lo and behold, a white MSO, a white-owned MSO. So that to me was a big deal. But I really loved, the idea of, free property, free rent on your property. In Massachusetts, they had an educational program or a technical assistance. Now, the interesting thing is that when you're in Illinois and you're in Chicago, you hear about all these programs in other places across the country, but it's not until you actually go to them or until you actually talk to the people who are working on the programs or the people who would be affected by it that you realize oh wait, they ain't got it all together. I interviewed for a position to write curriculum for Massachusetts for their social equity technical assistance program. This is like a year before Illinois was even thinking about it. And it was literally, I didn't get it. And it was literally 2 years, 2 years before they even got it up and running. So it's you think, okay, this is great. We should do this. And then you realize in the actual implementation of it, it's just a little bit more complicated than what you can write out on paper, even with your best laid plans. And I think we're learning that the hard way in Illinois right now, as we figure out, how to get the licenses issued and all of those things. So definitely some growing pains and some, some lessons learned there. But certainly I learned a lot from, just being in California and seeing. The other thing I want to mention too that I've learned, and I think it'll be a little bit different in Illinois, is that when I was in California, I did a lot of my shopping in the underground, and there was a really thriving kind of underground scene, because what I saw was that there were so many companies that had to now go underground because regulation came and they can't meet, the regulatory requirements. So, seeing the real impact of legalization in that way as well was something that I've just kind of been keenly aware of, even as we come here, even though it's not the same here in Illinois, but just something to be aware of as well.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, and something that really strikes me about all of this is that it really highlights the power of just sort of bridging those gaps geographically, having those networks and being able to see, there's all these news. You can find articles that talk about how great these programs are, but then when you talk to somebody in real life, it's it hasn't really done it. And then it kind of speaks to the iterative power of policy too. In an ideal world, you can start something and then say that didn't work out so well, and then identify those things. And in an ideal world. And Malachi, that brings me to you. And you talked a little bit earlier about the relationship between the war on drugs and closing the racial wealth gap, which I think is something that is crucial to think about when we think about equity and cannabis. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you want to accomplish specifically with regards to that, and what an equitable landscape looks like to you. And then just a little bit more about, because I know that the Cannabis Opportunity Reinvestment Equity Program is in Sacramento, and I just want to hear more about how you were able to talk about, you know, those concepts within a policy environment, and make that connection with lawmakers.
Sure, absolutely. So, you know, one of the things about community economic development is there are these ingredients: access to capital, the policy and regulation, the workforce, the infrastructure, the civic engagement issues. And really, if you're creating any policy, these are the ingredients that you really need to be focused on. It's certainly one of the recurring aspects of, you know, my 20-year career as as having been someone who helped to write a business development skills training program for low-income residents, someone who worked in the governor's office, in the state legislature to address these issues. And so when Prop 64 was passed in California, one of the things that was very clear is that we needed to make sure that we were addressing, you know, all of those elements, not just in Sacramento, but throughout the state of California, and to be able to have some intentionality in how, you know, we're collecting the data and then providing the resources based on what the findings, recommendations, and conclusions are. And, you know, it's been a struggle since day one to get the the data out so that we can really push the policy decisions that need to be made. In Sacramento, it started with pushing the director at that time to complete a social equity analysis so that we knew the numbers about who was impacted by racialized enforcement of weed. You know, what are the zip codes? And certainly that needed to be the foundation for developing a program in Sacramento or anywhere in California, because we have Proposition 209 here in place, and this year we're trying to overturn that measure that, you know, removes the ban on affirmative action in the state. And so what we had to do is really push to have that social equity analysis done. They told us that we didn't need it, and then we got the program adopted, and then 3 months later, it's into a new year, and we're in a meeting with the city manager's office, and they tell us, oh, well, the city attorney says that we need a study. And we're like, we already told you we need a study. But, you know, those were, you know, some of the most irritating struggles. And then to go through the process of negotiating with not just Sacramento, but the entire state of California about, you know, what the tentacles of a program should look like in terms of technical assistance, in terms of, you know, how to make sure that we are providing contract opportunities with the general operators in the industry throughout the state, so that there is, for example, a requirement that you have to have 51% of your products coming from social equity participants, and that you have to make room on your shelves at these dispensaries for social equity participant products, that you need to make sure that a certain percentage of your staff is being hired across the supply chain, from cultivation to manufacturing to retail, and even have opportunities for ancillary businesses that have nothing to do with the seed. And that's really one of the interesting dynamics in the industry. And we think a lot about how it's likened then to the gold rush in California, which was king back in the day in the foundings of California, where it wasn't those who struck gold, but it was those who were selling axe and picks and sandwiches and other kinds of things to the industry, the gold industry. And so, the green rush is something that we really have a lot of work to do in Sacramento. I'm proud to say that we were able to really put those kinds of features in place as we negotiated. We had a lot of resistance to having those elements in policy in Sacramento. But since that time, it has influenced the state. It has also influenced other areas around the country. And so we now, though, have still, the challenge of making sure that whether it's local, state, or federal government, we're spending tax revenue on access to capital, and spending that tax revenue so that the amount for access to capital is higher than what we're spending on enforcement and with police, and so that we're not using tax revenue to hire mercenaries to get rid of white boys' competition. And so that's a huge issue in this industry across the nation that we have to deal with. We are, by ignoring the access to capital issue and how we use the tax revenue, we're ignoring the impacts of the racial wealth gap, as Lanice pointed out, and those impacts where someone goes into jail, got out, can't get a job, housing, college tuition, can't buy a strong position into the marketplace with a business, can't really navigate through those issues of dysfunction in the community that eventually gets gentrified, and then you come and you have these very costly and complex regulatory hurdles, which causes the market to go underground, and further, I think, does damage to our ability to make sure that we're moving in a more equitable direction. But that's part of the lesson too, is that policymakers need to understand, and hopefully funders understand the needs of grassroots organizers on the ground, and that is that we really have to push that that approach of making sure that we have the tools that are needed, the data that is needed, so that we don't have this imbalance of how tax revenues are spent. We don't have this uneven methodology in terms of how local programs are designed, how the state program is designed, because not only are you ignoring the fact that these wealthy investors that Lanice pointed to earlier, having an advantage, but you're also ignoring the fact that we have no closing right now of loopholes for escaping the requirements of having to do a number of the things that are important to equity, including that contracting, the hiring, including requirements for partnering with those who have been impacted by the war on drugs. And so, one of the things that I think of in that category in California is how Prop 64 has no prescription for equity. The only thing we focused on in terms of equity where Prop 64 is concerned is the making sure that ex-offenders who were arrested are not blocked from the industry. But even there's a need to address how cities and counties who can do whatever the hell they want to do still put up those barriers, and how only 5 cities in the state of California actually have an equity program, which means that if someone were to go to a place like the desert near the California-Nevada border, if they were to go to some place like that that doesn't have an equity program, they could get their license, their first local license that is required there at the local level, and then go to the state office of cannabis management. Well, we're consolidating the state agencies right now, so I don't know what the name will be ultimately, but you go to the state level and you get your state license, where right now there is no requirement for contracting or hiring, partnering in exchange for getting your state license. So we have to be extremely intentional if we're going to address the racial wealth gaps caused by the war on drugs. And, I think that starts with empowering activists with the data and with the tools, as well as to shape policy, empower them to be able to shape policy. And then it also just as much requires us to support entrepreneurs to make sure that they have the technical assistance in terms of legal support, in terms of business planning support, being able to make pitches to investors so that they earn and can land a competitive position in the market.
Thank you. Yeah, Malachi, you said a lot of interesting things, especially I think the 2 things that stood out to me were you talking about the ancillary businesses and how that presents, an opportunity, a unique opportunity within the landscape that, can reduce the regulatory and financial hurdles as well. And then also that, I've heard and seen so much about, because I'm in California as well, about how Prop 64 included so much about enforcement and sort of like overcompensated for people's worries about cannabis, I guess, like the old prohibition model, just overcompensated for it in that. And then we see all of the same things being replicated post Prop 64 as what was happening before Prop 64. And it's like, how do we get out of this, this like cycle? And if I could have all of the presenters put their mics on, because I think it would be nice to go into more of a conversational style right now, rather than putting everybody on the spot. But because I have so many questions too, just thinking about, okay, so we've grounded ourselves in reality a little bit, a lot about how your journeys happen and how you've been able to push the work that you have. And I'm wondering something that's, trying to get us to think about what is the vision, right? So what is the vision in a perfect world where like a policy landscape that truly incorporates social and racial equity? What would that look like without the constraints that we have right now?
I got plenty of thoughts.
Go for it.
I would think like a cannabis justice policy platform would have at least 3 tenets. The first, what Malachi mentioned, no cannabis tax dollars being spent on underground cannabis enforcement. If you're a business owner or investor, you want to get into the cannabis industry, you should either accept that you have another competitor that doesn't have a permit, or you should urge that those dollars that are being spent on the enforcement be spent on community investment to either transition as many people over that would want to, or maybe actually make regulations that would accept most people. If you're a business owner and you don't want that type of competition and people that don't have permits, you can advocate along with everyone else for the government to regulate in such a way that it would allow the widest net of current folks in the underground to transition to the above ground market. So that's the option. But the option of saying that you understand about the drug war and you feel bad about all that, and now because you have a permit, you want the folks that don't have a permit to go to jail, that's not real. That's not equity. That's not what we're interested in. And those aren't two truths that can coexist. That's just hypocrisy. So then the next one would be a refund to the communities that were harmed by its enforcement. Like I said, those communities didn't get the prioritization of funding, went to something that they're now saying, oh, my bad, that's cool enough for reselling it in stores. And so if it's, oh, my bad, it's not like you just keep it pushing. Something has to be refunded. The things that money should have been spent on need to be spent on. Again, at like decades of money being spent in the wrong places, we're gonna catch up. And then things like Prop 64. Again, Malachi mentioned Prop 64, and I had so many issues with that. Hood Incubator was definitely on record as a no endorsement. Definitely on record as saying it's racist. Definitely was on record saying it's the war on drugs 2.0. And everything has played out, but they got certain folks to hop onto it because they said they had this community aspect to it and this like criminal justice aspect, which was like the expungement.
Right.
But on the other side, you see that all these monies that they're going to the state funding that they're doing for the community reinvestment, it's not focused. And so the same counties and districts that were already getting access to funds and already had books and already had healthcare centers, those are the same ones that can get access to these funds that are coming in. It's not targeted. Now, yes, communities that were harmed by the enforcement also can get in there, but that's equality. Like everyone has the opportunity is not what's needed. What's needed is for the communities that were stolen from because they were trying to enforce a racist policy gets that money. And right now it's set up that like the 500 mil, and there's like a 500 million youth fund. That makes no sense to me. It was so strategic though, and so smart, because when you start attacking the youth don't need that, who do you sound like? A crazy person. F them youth. No.
Right, like how you gonna be against the kids?
Exactly. Right. That's set up.
And there's no racial equity formula for how the youth fund is actually spent.
Yeah. Then white kids getting extra books.
And it only speaks to Lanice, you and I have had this conversation about like the, run the refund or getting us back our money that we lost from the war on drugs. And that's just the financial, right? There's so many intangibles. There's so much intangible loss just in terms of, all of it, like literally all of it. When I even hear about the war on drugs, I have to remind myself that like, oh yeah, Kiana, you actually were a victim of the war on drugs. Like it's not just a normal, and normalized thing for your father and your aunts and your uncles and everybody in your family to have been, you know, on crack and in and out of jail and going like, but it has been like one of those kind of intangible costs. It's just that we've normalized that level of dysfunction or that level of, you know, oppression to the point where we don't even think about it. And we see it all the time where people are like fighting against their own self-interest. They don't even realize that half the stuff that you're fighting for, like, I'm fighting for you too, right? You get, you know, so even some of those like mental, the mental cost, the emotional labor, the, you know, the fact of the matter, and when we talk about like ancillary businesses, elevated education is absolutely an ancillary business. I went to college, I got a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, and whatever. I still don't really know how to run a business, right? And you know, my parents were not. Well, my dad, he's a hustler, but you know, he wasn't able to like give me like the nitty gritty, like how to run a business. So even just kind of the loss of that, you know, some of the financial knowledge and stuff is like cultural. It's things that are knowledge that's passed down through families. But if your mama is a, you know, single mother working 2 or 3 jobs because your daddy's on crack, and, you know, like all of those things, those are a part of that cost too, and something that's never going to be quantifiable. But certainly if we're looking at, for me, any kind of real social equity plan is going to try to take into account some of that as well, right? So, you know, social equity doesn't just have to mean that you get a chance to open a weed business, right? It doesn't have to, the money can come from that, but we should be able to use our money in any kind of way that we need to use it, right? So if that means being able to go to school, if that means being able to start a business, if that means getting some trade and technical education, if that means, but like whatever it means, right? I should be able to use the money in the way that is necessary and needed for me and my family based on how I see fit.
Exactly, and we should be able to get all our money, because the weed money ain't even enough money to pay back a fraction of what should have been happening in our communities, what we should have been having investments in. And so I want to make sure that we stop cutting ourselves short. I think thank you to James Anthony with the Anthony Law Group. You know, one of my mentors, he's on the board of the Hood Incubator. He kept asking me once, like, why you keep talking about the weed money like it's something? And, you know, I think about it, and, you know, Oakland's first year we collected almost 13 mil. The second year, it's almost 9 mil over taxation. You see that number went down. But long story short, at the most Oakland's ever collected so far is 14 mil. If we steady out, get back on track, what, maybe 14 mil, grow a little bit, get more dispensaries, maybe 20 mil? That, how much do you think, I mentioned the supply chain of mass incarceration. How much do you think it costs for the police officers all the way down the supply chain to the probation officer? From arrest to
the bail bonds,
release,
right?
All that. And that's the intangible things you're talking about, Kiana. The bails bondmen, the commissary,
call, the vending machines, right? You know, my daddy was in jail not too long ago. We went to go and visit him, and it's like, you got to do, it's so special now, right? Everybody's getting a little piece of that pie. Everybody's getting a cut. If you want to send money, there's a whole new system that you go through now. You can't just get your little money order and send it in the mail no more. You got to go through JPay or whatever, right? Like everybody's getting some of this money.
And you know what? There's
money off of it.
Yeah, didn't mean to interrupt you, Kiana. But you know, the conversation that we're having reminds me, Kiana, of the time that actually, Lanice, we were in Chicago for the Policy Link conference, and we had a chance to tour the south side of Chicago. And there were these brothers who were, just in with the hood. And they, we all had to wear like lime green shirts so that everybody in the hood knew not to mess with us.
Don't do my city. Don't do my city like that. What you not gonna do?
No. No. This is love. This is love. What I'm just saying is the resiliency of the. Well, I would be fronting if I didn't say we don't have South Sides in Sacramento.
Right.
Everywhere you go, got a South Side or a West Side. But anyways, I'm just saying, there was so much passion and beauty among the people in the neighborhood in terms of, what their dreams and aspirations are. And we noticed that despite the challenges, right? And so, to be able to have, goals like we have in Sacramento, we insisted on a goal of 50% of all of the licenses, so that we would be able to be in a position of really having a sustained, strong position in the marketplace, so that we could correct some of the damages that were done in the community. But we're also dealing not just with new laws. We're dealing with some of the old rules that were in place in Sacramento in particular that are an impediment to us being able to do what we need to do for our community. Like 30 dispensaries is the total number of dispensaries in Sacramento that we have that are allowed by the city. It was just after 3 years now of us pushing that just this week, we got them to add another 10, but that doesn't get us to the place of having half of the 30 dispensaries. We only have 10 specifically for social equity participants. And then they said that we couldn't copy the model of a group of 10 of the dispensaries that illegally got a monopoly of the dispensary, and they have a chain of dispensaries, and they told us that we couldn't have a chain of 5 where we're giving all 130 social equity participants a shareholder opportunity in a chain of 5 dispensaries. So there's already this scarcity, but you won't allow us to do innovation because you want to control the market, despite the injustices that we've been through.
What did Moana teach us? And Mulan, you do it anyway.
Do it anyway. Right. Yeah. And so, because what we could do literally, and just getting to that vision, that question that you have, Joelle, is we literally would be able to, after the 3rd year, pump a certain percentage of revenues intentionally as a rule that the shareholders have adopted into reinvesting into our community, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's, other non-cannabis, types of retail and the like, because we do have infrastructure issues and economic development challenges in our communities. And so, this is I think, I could go on and on about the vision.
Yeah.
Malachi,
I think Lenisa wants to hop in. Yeah.
I challenge you to do it anyway. And sometimes it's just like how they did it. They started off individually, then they got together behind the scenes and made that agreement, because they're going to tell you not to do it up front. But here's the thing.
Right.
They come for you. You do it anyway. They come for you. They're coming for their white boy friends.
Mm-hmm.
You both come down together.
Right.
So right now they're expecting you to behave like a good Negro citizen. I don't want no trouble. But this is the time for that good trouble. You got to do it, because as soon as they try to enforce you, they got to enforce everybody. Because there's no way that they can enforce you, the community cooperative, the community investment fund, and the other group folks that have twice as much on the monopoly and don't even have a community investment fund, and they've been letting stay there for 5 years. It does not look good for optics. Now, out and about races like Trump, they don't care about those optics. But from my understanding, Sacramento is like your normal mainstream races, and they don't want to be like racist.
Right. So, not racist.
They certainly don't want to look racist. They don't want it.
Yeah.
All of them.
So I say do it, bro. And I'm
Yeah.
here a phone call away. If I could.
Well, I
Yeah.
do want to point out that it's always cool to be able to call on Anise and now to be able to call on Kiana to really help each other navigate through these issues at the local level and at the state level, the national level as well, because we do have to do it anyways, and we have to persist,
Mm-hmm.
and we have
That brings that brings me to a question. You actually are leading into it really well. Is that, one thing that strikes me is that so many of these social equity programs are at the local level, and some are starting to get momentum at the state level more and more. But to really address the racial wealth gap and to build on these like lofty visions that you guys and everybody else has, it's important to policy and everything has to scale up. So how do we scale up this movement? And is federal legalization the only way, or are there other routes that you can take to sort of like build this infrastructure that can like have a national reach?
Well, I think one of the things is we definitely have to have attention paid to states that are just moving into the recreational marijuana space. We need to be able to provide some guidance to them about, how to be proactive in terms of how those policies are shaped. That's one of my immediate answers to that question, and I'll just leave that there because I know Kiana and Lanice have thoughts.
I was repeat the question again.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So I'm wondering how to get from I know that these social equity policies are mostly local and beginning to be more statewide, but how do we, to address the wealth gap in a meaningful way, we need to scale up, and there's so many things that need to happen that bring everything together sort of on a national level. So I'm wondering if, there's ways to build that national infrastructure without federal legalization, or legalization is the only way to build that and to make that happen?
Well, I think for it to have like the biggest lasting change, we need that push at the federal level. But I do think that, at this grassroots level, us talking to each other, us sharing ideas across across the country with each other in terms of what works here and what didn't work there, shared experiences and things of that nature. Like, to me, that is really what kind of creates the groundswell, right? So I saw something happening in Oakland and I was like, oh, we got to make sure, we do that when it's our turn. And there's people that reach out to us and they're like, yo, we're almost there. What can you share with us? So I think when, there is no one group or there is no one leader or one thing that is, putting together the plan, but as we're all talking with each other, as we're all, kind of giving the same message and really just kind of letting them know on a real base level, but like, yo, this is what we're looking for now, right? And making sure that we all kind of have that, are pushing forward those similar messages about what does social equity actually mean and what is diversity and inclusion. And we're not just falling for the okie doke anymore. And you're not just going to get, Black people on your panel so your panel looks good and has a little color to it. Like, if we're not talking about the real issues, if you're not talking about, real compensation, or if you're not talking about something more than, because we need more than just jobs and expungement, right? So, I think it just is going to require a lot of that grassroots effort, because I think the top is going to follow what's happening from the bottom. And that's kind of how we've seen it happen across the country with legalization, whether it's on the medical end or on the recreational end. And hopefully, it gets better and there's improvements that happen at each step along the way so that each state
our city gets better and better.
I just think, like I mentioned, being in the first city that we got to experience the advocacy journey, the beginning of the advocacy journey, which continues for an equity program around the regulation of medical and or adult use. I think what I noticed when I said I had to get out my feelings and start like going back to the book, be methodical. It took me, well, first before the national of the policy agenda, how do we make that national? First to break down, to finish my first question before, your first question before was the no police, refunding, but understanding that the no police and refunding in many ways to me is so much larger than just the diversity in the cannabis industry, because the assumption of the Black people that will end up making it in the industry being completely community oriented and investing back and not being extractors and capitalists to the worst isn't realistic. I've known Black capitalists since I was a kid. There was Oprah, there was Michael Jordan, now there's Tyler Perry, there's the P. Diddy. I heard that he don't even pay his artist. So
I'm mad you called him Mr. P. Diddy.
Sounding like somebody's grandma.
Yeah, you sound like my grandma.
But what I'm trying to say is like the Black capitalism isn't going to save us, because this is maybe Black business could save us if it was tied to the economic system of cooperativism. But from my understanding, it's not. And so I don't want to put all my buckets for trying to slow the racial wealth gap by putting my bets on the Black capitalist.
Right.
I want to put more of my bets on policy that's going to say no spending money from on enforcing the unpermitted cannabis operations. And I like to spend the money, access on my time and my organizing skills the world to dismantling the impacts of the drug war, which looks like, money, restoration, the refund back into the communities, whether it's directly to individuals and or the community, how they decide. So that's my three right there. I'm not saying F diversity. Yeah, diversity is important. I hope whatever Black capitalist makes it, I hope they're not worse than Mr. P. Diddy or Mr. Tyler Perry. But good job for them. If Malachi and other folks like Malachi can put together that community program, that would be great. But those will be unicorns even among the Black capitalists. And I would say especially among the Black capitalists, because let's be honest, we're all here. This is a racial justice conference, and if we're going to talk about economic justice, and we're going to talk about using business as a tool to create social change, we got to understand that some business people, like some white politicians, use the term about business ownership and being from the community just as a marketing ploy, but they're really just there to extract value just like any other business owner. Anyway, so from there, that being like our policy, like no money on the police, refunding, diversity good, but not putting my hopes and dreams into Black capitalists, then talking about this national organizing, that's where we're going. Because just this week, I've talked to organizers in Sacramento, went to a city council meeting even, first time in a long time, talked to organizers in New Jersey. They got some ballot initiatives going. And I talked to an organizer in Chicago. They got some lawsuits going. And for me, I know like a lot of folks know my organization and the work I do because, again, from one of the origin cities. And, folks talk to each other too sometimes, here and there. But without intentionality, it's always like the family reunion. We only see each other at weddings and funerals. In the cannabis industry, those are the conferences. We need to have intentionality, and that's why the Hood Incubator next year will be launching an intentional program to make sure that we have a grassroots affiliate network of folks like Malachi, like Kiana, like all the other cities, to come together, sharing information about the policy itself, about their political acumen, how do they maneuver situations, challenges, conflicts, best practices, all of that, but then also developing our own campaign skills together. And that has to be intentional because, again, most of these people, like Malachi is different. Malachi came from 10 years of already doing community organizing. I was doing community organizing, but most of these people that I'm talking to around the country, they were just trying to sell weed, and then the government was acting crazy, saying we're trying to help you, but then they really weren't. And like Kiana said, they had to get right to it. They started hit the ground running. And so they folks need a real container to like for me, when I as like a community organizer, they didn't just, well, at first there was one campaign, they just threw me some keys and said, do it. But, you know, yeah, that's great to get like a entry level set of skills. But at some point, you know, you got to sit down and go to your training school camp.
Right.
Actually build the actual skill set up, build the actual relationships together. And I'm hoping that the outcome of this activity, the Hood Incubator launching the National Affiliate Network, which I'm hoping that both Kiana and Malachi will join, but hopefully
you already hope, girl, it's done.
Hopefully the outcome of that is that you know, I don't want federal regulation to happen before 24 months personally, because if federal regulation happens, what infrastructure do these grassroots organizations have to demand a seat at the table to influence and design the regulation? Right now, it's going to be the John Boyner, the Roger Stones, and just to think about that, you know, like it was like the bottom people, it was the cannabis community, it was the stoners, it was the losers who built up the power, and then who the corporate people came in, saw the opportunity, now that they're the top, I guess, of this triangle, and they're taking over. We let them handle all of the actual negotiations. And we need to take our power back because they're not negotiating for us. But we've been like, oh, I'm not really the political acumen one. All right, DPA, or not even DPA. I mean, DPA is doing a good job. I didn't like how Prop 64 came out, but I'm just saying, like, they're not targeting equity. It's just like, let's help the community and everyone. So I'm just saying, we're going to be launching the affiliate network, and it's to build our campaign skills, our technical skills, our relationships with each other across the country, and to make sure we have like really tight like containers of information sharing. And hopefully, if that's executed well, you know, we're going to launch with 5 chapters in 2021. I want to grow as many chapters as possible, but more than just the chapters that already have adult use and medical, we really want to grow in the South and make chapters in places like Louisiana or Georgia or North Carolina, where it's really unlikely in the next iteration of the next campaign cycle, so that we can get enough time to start building a base, get those folks educated so that they can lead the fight and not be the add-on for the Black social equity.
Right. And I just want to say, you know, how excited I am to join this effort that Lanice is leading, because, you know, we do need to have that economic justice accelerator type of activity that will put us in front of the problem as opposed to always reacting to it. California Urban Partnership has also been doing some similar work, just at least at the local level. But I think the other thing to point out is the documentary film that we're producing in conjunction with a study that we worked on with public health advocates, University of California, Davis, UCLA. It's called When the Smoke Clears, which is a mapping study on where racially enforced marijuana stuff was going on. And the documentary series. There's a 5-minute series that is out, 5-minute trailer video that's out now that is a precursor to the series, which will cover the business issues, the tax revenue, criminal justice system reform, and public health issues. And so really looking forward to throwing that into the hopper so that we can really begin to, as I'm going to use another one of Lanice's words that we actually talked about yesterday, and that's to really focus on changing the culture, and I think that becomes extremely important in this work.
Yeah, so in terms of like reducing the stigma, or how do you mean changing the culture?
Well, changing the culture of how the community is engaged and feels empowered, because at times there is in the community, I think what we see, a feeling of being disempowered, but to really be emboldened by knowing that we are powerful beyond measure, because we have the data and because we are able to really see the success stories out there more ubiquitously. And for a long time, for too long, we just haven't had the capacity to do that. Because if you don't see success, it's hard for you to grasp it many times, especially when we are dealing with communities, who have been beat down so hard by the war on drugs, by police brutality, by racial wealth gaps. We need to show, we need to shape the culture so that we really move in divine and dynamic ways that we're intended to move into.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, just to clarify, yes, what Malachi said, and more broadly, I meant the culture of the cannabis community in general, not just the Black people in the cannabis industry, because it's the full voter block of the cannabis community, where culturally right now they're leaning into their power to gain the right to sell, buy, and smoke weed. And then it's as if their power ends and they get helpless and confused and not powerful, stuck, when we start talking about dismantling the drug war. For me, the culture is to change the culture of you have just as much power, and if not you, who? You can lead this, just like you can lead that, you can lead this. And right now I feel like the culture is half people of like myself, of my race, who are just angry at the memory and the living impacts of the drug war. And I think alone our numbers aren't significant enough as a voter bloc to demand the change we want, as we already can tell. But collectively, with the rest of the people who want to smoke weed, stuff can get passed. And those other people happen to be white, happen to be liberals, happen to be 4 for 4. We're in an election year. I was referring to folks that vote 4 out of the last 4 elections. So folks that know the chair of this committee and that assembly or that city council member, folks that have relationships with those that are decision makers or influencers. That's how we've helped to get those weed passed this far, because remember, it was about freeing the plant. And so if they were able to make relationships and build campaigns that could free the plant, and if social equity and dismantling drug war has been an add-on, they just need to take that and add it on as like it's all together. It's not an add-on. Don't get stuck in shame about, oh, I'm white and now I got this cannabis business, or I like to smoke weed. Take it as empowerment. You know, take it as empowerment. Man, if I can get weed passed to smoke, I can get the communities harmed by enforcement restored. That's your birthright. That's what you're trying to do. They're together. They're not separate. If you get one done, you get the other one done, and one don't need to come before the other.
You know what? And when you just said that, Denise, it reminded me of another aspect of culture as well, in terms of engaging and mobilizing the influencers, because sometimes what you have, and we had to work on this down in Los Angeles. We had very influentials that don't like weed at all. Right, they're just, it's going to destroy, the kids' brains and yada yada yada. But at the same time, they were unwilling to. Not only were they flawed in terms of not understanding the health benefits of the plant, but based on their own flawed reasoning, they refused to get involved in directing tax revenue to benefit those kids that they said they cared so much about. So they would rather to have those business opportunities as well as the tax revenue go back to those who hurt us. They literally wanted to send that back to the entities that hurt our communities. So we had to do some work to really shift that line of thinking, and I think that is part of the culture shift as well.
And y'all did a good job because we got 500 mil going to the youth every year.
To the youth.
I like that we keep talking about culture, though, because something that I've been really thinking about and developing as a concept, and also like right now it's just kind of a concept in my head that I'm developing into a piece for a particular course. And it is the sociology of social equity, right? There's language, there's culture, there's groups, there's subcultures. There is a lot that is involved in that social equity thing. There's history, there's context, right? There are, there's opposers, right? There's allies, fake and real. There's so much that's involved. And one of the things that we really saw here in Illinois was that once that social equity thing was on the table, once that program was touted, once people knew it was out there, and then once they knew that you got, extra points for being social equity as far as your application is concerned, there were so many people that just kind of swooped down on Illinois and were just kind of trying to, cherry picking Black folks, poor Black people left and right, people that had no real idea of what they were getting themselves into. And it's overwhelming. Like if you ain't been studying this for however long, if you just been kind of a casual smoker, if you still call it reefer, like it's a lot of different things that really go into that. And so I'm working on this application writing class, but it really is more than just like the how to write an application, right? It's like let's take it back to the beginning. Let's actually set the context for, because there's a lot, right? When we're talking about dealing with low to middle income, Black and brown people, there's a lot in terms of how you going to deal with this regulatory environment. And it's just a lot. So I really just been chewing on it, and I will be reaching out to the both of you as I dig deeper into that concept to really figure out what is the sociology of social equity and what are the various tenets that apply, because that's a special group. It's a special thing, and it deserves its own study. And everybody's just kind of flailing around in the dark trying to figure it out. But I think there's definitely some observable features and perhaps some solutions that can come, just from the deeper study of it all.
That's cool. I'm looking forward to that. I want to take that class or that course. We have, so I could talk about this all day, but I want to respect the time of our amazing interpreters, Shannon and Antonio and Castro, who's helping us record it. Nico, thank you, everybody. But I also want to close on just having you guys go around and say, give us a plug for what you're doing next. Give us, something to look forward to, something that's hopeful and optimistic about this year. Whatever you want to end on and tell us about, and then we'll wrap it up.
I'll go real fast. Check us out next year. We're on, whenever you want to, but I'm saying next year, make sure you look for our programming. We're going to have our Cannabis Justice Accelerator. It's a training program on understanding the drug war, impacts of its enforcements, how to reverse it, campaign building, and technical skills. So the idea is that that's open for everyone who's kind of interested from the cannabis community that want to become active agents to dismantle. That's our training school that we're offering. We also, that's too much because that's like a 16-week program. If that's too much, we got our higher learning series programs, which is a monthly discussion every month. We'll take off either some Black-centric article, like research article, not like People's Magazine, I think like Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw with critical race theory, intersectionality, or we'll study a documentary or a pop culture film, but it's gonna be a theme between them. We'll pretend like we're doing a master graduate, but it'll be really cool. You can smoke while reading peer-reviewed journals and comparing it to what we think that means for watching the movie Friday. Just really trying to have fun with our education. That's why it's called the Higher Learning Series. And then quarterly, we're going to have our Cannabis Justice Trivia. That's going to be fun. It's like take everything you learn from our monthly discussion series and like get your crew together, get your team, no more than 10, and you can compete with folks around the country on who knows cannabis justice the most.
And how do people get in touch with you?
Our
website, your website?
Okay. http hoodincubator.org, and then all the social media also Hood Incubator.
Great.
News on my computer, it just popped up that Cardi B filed for divorce to Offset again. So that was.
Oh no, not again!
It just popped up on my computer as news.
Shut it up.
That is news.
Don't come for Black love, all right? I wish them all the best.
Yeah, we got to stay on Black love. Got to stay on Black love somehow, some way. We got to lift it up. Well, I would just ask folks to please check out our website, CaliforniaUp.org. It's California spelled all the way out. The U stands for urban. The P stands for partnership.org. And on our homepage right now, we do have our 5-minute preview of the series, When the Smoke Clears. It is a documentary series that will be out in January. We also have a very exciting project, our Arise, ARIZE.org search engine, where we will be having data on Black folks in specific industries like food, construction, the tech sector, as well as cannabis. And so please check us out.
Awesome. You can figure out what's going on with Chicago Normal at www.chicagonormal. Normal is spelled NORML. There's no A. chicagonormal.org. We're super busy. We're just trying to keep the ball rolling, keep things moving in terms of our classes. We got some hemp stuff coming up real soon. Still working with the legislators. We got a trailer bill coming up that we got to do some work on, and then also figuring out what's going on with our current licensing situation, and all the fun things that we didn't get to do this year in our first year of legalization because of COVID. So just figuring out what that pivot is and how to still have some engaging, fun, educational things happening online. And then hopefully when the world opens up, we can get back together as, as collectives and groups. You can also follow me on don't follow me on social media, but I'm on Facebook and Instagram under Kiana Hughes on Facebook, Elevated Education LLC on Facebook, and Keisha Greenleaf on Instagram. Also Elevated Education LLC on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kiana, Lanisa, Malachi, and again, thank you, Shannon and Antonio, and all of the conferences.
Yes, thank you, Shannon and Antonio. You guys are awesome.
And Race Forward.
Y'all are dope.
Fascinating.
Thank you, Race Forward. Race Forward. Thank you so much.
Were you your first cannabis one?
Yeah, it is. Yep. This is our first group. Yeah. So, yeah, hopefully not the last. We're looking forward to it. Thank you.